get back into this, my friends. Alright. Chapter 20. Constance. Miss Gray, this is exactly what I was looking for, Mac, the stage manager, said. We were looking at beautiful clouds of fog filling the stage, making everything appear quite magical, even the mop and bucket standing front and center. You are a humdinger of a gal sometimes. Thanks, Mac, I said. I couldn't believe it. Finally, after all the days with Andrew, I had finally been given a whole weekend to myself. He had been so apologetic that he had to visit his family, but I reassured him that distance makes the heart grow. But inside mine was bursting with joy. Time to just do whatever I wanted. Time to finally play with my chemistry set to create fake weather systems. Or at least fabulous stage fog that looked fantastic in the lights. You keep making this. I'll pay you for the materials and a little extra for that noggin of yours, said Mac, hands in pocket. Best of all, it won't stink up the costumes. Okay, you better skedaddle out of here. The girls are gonna need you. I nodded and jumped up onto the stage, as light as a feather. I ran backstage and stood in the wings for a moment. Then I did a little jive and clapped my hands together. I was so happy. I didn't know I could feel quite this happy. Nothing else I'd done before this. Not horse diving or boys or helping with costumes. Making something like this, that was magical. No, it was science. I barely heard a word anyone said to me backstage, though I did notice Chloe say something about me being loved and lost in the clouds. I found that was insulting, but I didn't say anything. I never needed to say anything. Besides, for some reason, it didn't upset me, because at least I knew it wasn't true. And maybe I was lost in the clouds. Lost in the clouds of man-made fog. Or actually, girl-made fog. I stayed in the dressing room during the show, cleaning up and just overall feeling proud of myself, and happily entered the whirlwind of activity after the performance, undoing buttons and collecting items that needed to be cleaned. I was in such an incredible mood, I wondered if it will ever go away. I even said yes when Chloe pressured me to go out again and borrowed another sparkly dress. Would you like to try my lipstick? She asked. Normally, when asked, I'd say no. Not that I often asked my opinion. I was often asked my opinion on makeovers, but this time for some reason I said yes. I would. Thank you. Carefully put it on. It was bright and bold. It made me feel a little nervous. But I was feeling bright and bold, so I took in a deep breath and admired the look instead. Constance, there's a boy waiting for you, said Nancy, poking her head in from the hall to the stage door. And then there it was. My good feelings popped like a balloon. My face fell. I had thought Andrew was visiting his parents in Bridgehampton this weekend. I nodded. Are you okay? Asked Chloe, noticing my expression. Why do boys ruin everything? I asked, standing up and straightening my dress. The right boys don't, she replied. She gave a little squeeze from behind. It's okay to decide you don't like a boy. It's all about finding the right one. I nodded. I wasn't sure that there would be a right one. Right now, I had a crush on my chemistry set. It wasn't that I didn't like boys and didn't get all fluttered around them. I just felt that wasn't my priority, even if everyone else it seemed to be. I grabbed my things and made my way to the stage door. I took a deep breath and smiled, and then opened it. Bill, I asked, surprised. I'm so happy you're here, but why would you want stage? He asked, all smiles. I'm not a performer, I replied, still stunned as I stepped out into the restaurant. But the horse! Oh, that was a favor from Molly, I replied. I prefer to help out behind the scenes. I noticed as if that sounded perfectly reasonable. Bill nodded as that seemed perfectly reasonable. Can I buy you a drink? It's so wonderful to see you. I noticed some of the girls lingering at the edges of the stage, watching, and I wondered what it must be like to be at Chambers, to always have people observing you, but it's strangely nice to see him. Yes, please, I replied. He led me past the tables, by the foot of the stage, and up onto a higher platform towards the back, where generally rich benefactors watched the show, but didn't really. They just chatted with one another while being served by most attentive waiters. A performance of some kind went on in the distance. This, of course, is where Mr. Chambers would sit, with his friends. This is where Bill directed me and pulled out a chair for me at an empty table. Were you here alone? I asked. Yes, he replied. I like to do things alone. It's weird, I know, he added, shaking his head. Not that weird, I replied with a smile. I understood. I wish I had that privilege. It would have been nice just to have the time to not be around anyone. So what are you doing backstage then? Flagging down a waiter, who arrived almost instantaneously. I supposed he'd been waiting and watching for Bill Chambers to raise his hand. Oh, it's not exciting. I just help with costumes, changing into them, quick changes, cleaning, and then sometimes cleaning them sometimes. Sorry to interrupt you, but what would you like to drink? Asked Bill. Oh, just a soda, I said, turning to the waiter. 2 sodas, he asked. He said to the waiter, then turned back to me. You were saying? Was I? Reply. Oh, yes, I was. About the costumes. Well, it sounds fascinating. The world of backstage always has been so intriguing to me, said Bill. I laughed hard. I laughed because it was quite the opposite. Messy and smelly. Did I dare tell him that girls smelled? But oh, I said suddenly. Yes, I did something amazing today. I added, why not share after all? That bubbly, excited feeling was flooding me again. I came up with a perfect recipe for fog. For fog? He looked confused. For fog for the stage. That is, I made it at home. I had this little chemistry set, nothing fancy, but I made it, and I did it, and Mac's gonna use it. I grinned wide. That's wonderful, said Bill, as just sodas arrived. Perfect timing. He held up his glass, and I did too, following his lead. Here's to inventing things. I couldn't stop smiling. To inventing things. We sipped on our drinks. I know you like machines and how they work. I saw you the other day with that projector, I said. I do, but I need to ask you one more question about your chemistry set, said Bill, waving out the question about him. I nodded, even though I couldn't think of the last time anyone wanted to ask me about anything. Yeah. So I turned to him. I told him how it all started in school when I was around 7, playing with the classic volcano experiment. From that point on, I thought it was fascinating that you could mix other things to make things. I got another soda, and we got some appetizers. And I found myself talking about my family and how I loved them, but I couldn't be them, and how horse diving terrified me. But you were so good at it, and how I liked being alone like he did. Eventually I got to the point where I genuinely wanted to know more about him. I wondered if he was only trying to talk to me and avoid that subject. He couldn't truly be interested. Well, it's because I'm not that interesting, he said. My life is all planned out for me. I will take over my father's businesses eventually. Sometimes I go into the office with him and he forces me to attend these awful parties with these awful people. I need to get to know who's important. But honestly, I'm like you. Not possible, I said. Very possible. I like science too, as you know. How to fix things. If only I could work for Gent forever. You lean forward. Can I tell you a secret? Absolutely. I've been volunteering with them. I'm a handyman, he said with a laugh. No, yes. I go out every day with this man named Scott and we fix things. I just love it. I believe they're quite good. I just love it. I believe they think I'm quite good too. The other day, our boss, Mr. Connors, took me to help him on a top secret project. Ooh, I said. I was giddy. His excitement added on to my own, and it was a nice feeling. It's the most incredible machine I've ever seen. I have no idea what it does. Yes, said Bill, wide-eyed. It's both terrifying and beautiful at the same time. That sounds so interesting, I replied, my eyes also quite wide. There was something a little different about Bill tonight. He was always enthusiastic and kind to me, but this was something else. I couldn't figure it out. It was almost manic. I noticed a small black speck of dirt or something just below his left eye. I found myself fixating it until Bill slammed his soda glass on the table, spilling the stuff all over his hand. I nearly jumped out of my skin. You like science? He said. I'll show you. I do like science, I replied. Okay, why not? This was too much fun and quite exciting. We stood up and Bill flagged down the waiter as I attempted to put on my coat. For some reason, one of the sleeves refused to behave. I'll help, said Bill. Yes, he was quite giddy, and I gave me a pause, but only for a moment. It was hard to suppress the joy at being taken seriously for once by someone outside my family. Together we managed to get me in my coat, and then he grabbed my hand and pulled me across the room. I was laughing so hard. I didn't care that people were staring. Today was such a good day. Okay. Brand, Chapter 21. I watched as Bill and Constance from the shadows in the room. I felt like a spy. Two of them were having a grand old time, especially Bill. He was behaving in a weird way. I would have thought maybe he was drunk if they hadn't been drinking sodas the entire time. It was strange. Something was up, and I was going to figure out what. They stood up, and I quickly tried to flag down a waiter. I was ignored, of course, so I dropped $5 on the table and quickly got up to follow them. I didn't know where they were going and why, but I needed a story. I needed a way in. I overheard Bill saying something about a machine, and then that was all I needed to know. Those men from New York, now a new kind of machine, it all had to be connected. That's how it is, then, making connections without any proof. But I guess the thing's right in front of my face, not until it's too late. I followed them at a distance, leaving the theater and then walking through the foyer of a hotel. This one was far less grand than the plaza, and I felt more comfortable here. There were also a lot of columns holding up the roof, or at least pretending to, so I could hide behind them, kind of like a creep, and watch, also like a creep. They left the hotel and flagged down a cab. Shoot, I quickly made my way to the exit and outside. As they got in, I flagged one down myself and wondered if I could go back and grab those $5. But I had a bit more cash on me. It was all the cash I had on me for the rest of the week. This better be worth it. I got into the cab and said, "Follow that car." I couldn't help but smile. That's not something you get to say a lot. It was fun. The cabbie, for his part, didn't seem as thrilled at the idea of chasing someone. "Really?" he asked, turning in his seat to look at me. "No joke, friend," I replied. "I really need to follow them." The cabbie sighed and turned back. He pulled out and started tailing them. I wonder if he got asked this a lot. I thought it was just something from the movies, but here I was chasing a car, so circumstances must arise for other folks as well. Funny to think about it. We chased the car through the city to the edge of town. When they pulled over, we drove past them and around the corner. The cabbie knew to do that without me even having to ask. I probably would have thought to do that in the first place. Clever man. I paid him and tipped him and gave him a good nod. "Good luck, mate," he said. I smiled. I retraced my steps and Bill and Constance were gone. I quickly jogged over to the building they had been dropped off at. There was a single door in the wall. Sure, why not? I opened it slowly and carefully looked around. It was a large empty room, with some hooks hanging from the ceiling. Bill and Constance were nowhere to be found. Then I heard a laugh. It came from somewhere towards the back of the room. I raced across the open space to the staircase and looked down. I could hear them talking. Okay, I would wait just a moment. This was thrilling. This is what I'd been waiting for. Finally. Chapter 22. Constance. A stairway to nowhere. I had been in my fair share of former speakeasies. This was the kind of place that delighted showgirls and drew the fascination of rich potential suitors. So I assumed that there had to be more to this empty cement room. I walked up to one wall and looked at it closely, running my fingers across it, trying to find a hidden door. "Do you want me to just show you?" asked Bill. His energy was still off, calmer now but strange, almost antsy. I shook my head. I didn't want to admit that these kind of puzzles frustrated me, but I wanted to figure it out nonetheless. The cold air from outside helped clear some of my excitement, and I was feeling mildly more focused now. I could do this. I took a step back when I realized that there could be no secret doors cut into the wall, which could only mean one thing: the wall is the door. Bill smiled, a knowing smile, and I sighed inwardly, but smiled back. Men enjoyed smiling, knowing smiles around girls. Most of the time it was because one of the chorus girls would pretend not to know what a particular drink was or a food dish so that these young men could share their wisdom. But this time, at least it meant something. It was a smile indicating that Bill knew something I did not. "So then," I said to Bill, I felt that little feeling of anger. I sometimes felt in these kinds of moments, geez, I'm not going well. When I didn't understand something or someone else did, I pushed it down. It was silly to feel this way. He had offered to tell me, and I was the stubborn one now. I felt this needed to prove. Excuse me, everyone. Apologies. I felt this need to prove that I knew the secret. Despite knowing the secret was a secret, that was kind of the purpose of a secret. It didn't help that he was up a step, literally looking down at me, leaning so comfortably on the Newell post. Oh, of course. I stepped up to join him and gave his elbow a quick shove. As he slipped off the post with a "Hey!" I examined it. There was a hinge on one side, clear as day now that I was looking for it. I pulled at the top of the post and it swung open. Inside was a copper button, extra shiny right in the middle, right where clearly many a thumb had pushed on it. So I pushed on it. There was a loud clank and a rusty whirling sound. I quickly turned to watch as the wall opposite to us slowly opened. I approached and examined it. It wasn't cement after all. It was a heavy metal painted gray to match the rest of the walls. "What purpose does this serve?" I asked. "A second secret entrance?" "I assumed this is where they made the hooch," replied Bill. joining me at the door. They needed extra protections. I suppose so, I said, looking into the empty grey room beyond the door. There's more to go. Quite an adventure, said Bill, as he walked into the room. I followed him. I was feeling a little nervous now, not as excited as before. Quite an adventure. We passed quickly through the empty plain room, imagining knowing what I knew now, that this room was used for storing goods before they were shipped out. We made our way to a large hole in the wall to our left and down yet another dark staircase. At the bottom we were greeted by a large room. Apologies, everyone. Let me go back to a point where I remember. We made our way to a large hole in the wall to the left and down yet another dark staircase. At the bottom we were greeted by a large room. I looked up and saw rusted baskets hanging from the line that ran across the room, like a track for a model train set. Across from us were two giant tubs, and beside them, tables and overturned stools. The room felt ancient, like we'd opened an Egyptian sarcophagus, dust and ruin. Except for the machine. Isn't it incredible? Bill asked. It's both terrifying and fascinating, don't you think? I wasn't sure about that. What is it? I said, staring at it. It was quite the opposite of everything else in the room. New and shiny, but covered in some black spots here and there. It was completely modern and huge, not at all like the old-fashioned bootlegger setups. The time has come, the walrus said, to talk of many things, replied Bill, walking towards it. I followed him. The walrus? I asked, feeling a little concerned. He was sounding weird now, not giddy, not anxious. Now he was sounding almost mesmerized. I noticed as he turned towards the machine a few more specks of black at the nape of his neck. Black spots. I glanced at the machine. Bill placed a hand on it, almost like he was touching the side of a giant animal. He was deliberate and slow, drawing his hand across the side of the machine towards a massive opening on one side. He placed a hand on one of the large gears and pushed it slightly. I wasn't sure why, but nothing moved. From Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. Have you read the book? He asked, still looking at the machine. I didn't want to admit that I wasn't much of a reader of fiction. The only stories I knew were the ones that my parents would read to us from their giant worn copy of the complete works of William Shakespeare, which they did more for their own amusement than ours. The books that interested me were the science ones, or rather, I suppose, book. The one book I stole from the school last year. I still believe I borrowed it. I knew someday I'd return it, once I'd memorized it completely. I know of it, I replied. I was standing next to him now. But I didn't want to touch the machine. Something about it made me uncomfortable. What was the poem from the book? The walrus and the carpenter take several young oysters for a walk along the beach. Odd, I said. Perhaps odder still why on earth he was telling me any of this. Why was he acting so strange? It occurred to me now how dangerous inconsistent strangeness could be. The beginning of our night together had been so much fun, but now it had turned like overripe fruit. I felt my defenses rise. Bill gazed at the machine. He looked like he was about almost in trance. One could possibly say he was a man in love, but it was different somehow. Not love, but infatuation? Obsession, perhaps? The time has come, the walrus said, to talk of many things, of shoes and ships and sealing wax. He turned the corner of the machine where a large pipe curved downward, opening up at the end. Bill bent down and stared up into the large gaping mouth, almost stuck his entire head in, of cabbages and kings. His voice echoed now a little bit, and I took a small step backwards. And why the sea is boiling hot, and whether pigs have wings. He pulled his head out the pipe, stood upright, and looked at me. And what on earth is this thing for? That's not part of your poem, I replied. He shook his head. You should look here, mad scientist. What is this black stuff? I suddenly didn't want to. I was feeling more and more concerned for Bill. Besides that, I was quite intimidated by the machine. That the giant opening looked like it might bite my head off if I stuck it inside. But I couldn't tell Bill that. I wasn't wanting him to react badly. At this point, I really had no idea how he would. I approached the mouth of the machine and bent my knees, so I could look up inside it. It was completely black, like it had been painted, but it seemed wet, like it had only just been painted. I wasn't keen on touching the stuff, but I assumed it was paint. Paint of a dark black color, unlike anything I had ever seen before. A black so dark, it felt like I was looking into a hole that fell down into the depths of the earth. A hole like Alice's from the book. I knew that much. She fell forever and ended up in a completely new world. I felt a shudder rising in me. I didn't want to fall down any holes today. I backed away and stood upright. It's paint. Very black paint. Like looking into a moonless sky, said Bill, agreeing. Bill said agreeing. I appreciate that he understood. I've never said anything like it. Never seen anything like it. You should take a sample, he said, for your chemistry set. That spot deep inside me felt something different then. Not fear or anger, but excitement. I don't have a vial on me. I wished that he would given me more time to prepare, not have been so quite spontaneous with the visit. Then we'll have to come back with one. I could hear his excitement. I could hear my excitement echo back at me in his voice. What is this machine? What is it for, Bill? I asked. He shook his head. I have no idea. I came here for Mr. Connor to fix it, but what it does, no one told me. The Gent fellows have been so secretive. I thought maybe it was something to help with the plumbing at a larger club, but the more I examine it, the more it looks like something that is meant to make something. Make something? Don't you think so? There's no other tubes, there is no passage from one to another, it's all self-contained, except for this one exit. He indicated towards the pipe. Or entrance, I said. Bill nodded. Maybe. He paused. It's a little funny. What is? I slowly started to walk around the machine. My feet were taking control of my body, and my curiosity was getting the better of me. What are you? I thought. And then I thought, why are you hidden? Something Mr. Connor said. He talked about a monster. I thought it was a metaphor, but he seemed to imply it wasn't. You think they made a monster? I asked. I was skeptical. When I arrived at the side, Bill was standing by. I, too, placed a hand on the giant gear towards the bottom of the machine. I looked at Bill. He looked, well, for want of a better word, scared. I don't think that's true, I said, trying to reassure him. He shrugged and didn't say anything. I ran my fingers over the teeth of the gear, up and down and up and down. How does the rest of the poem go? I asked, trying to make him feel a little better. I looked up at the machine. It rose so high when standing this close. It was overwhelming. There was a pipe here, large and winding towards the mouth of the machine, like a boa constrictor. Oh, it just goes on, more absurdly, very typical, replied Bill, standing next to me and looking up as well. Of why the sea is boiling hot? But of course that's not true. Was that what absurdity was then? Just a lie? What's the point of it? They eat all the oysters, said Bill. He looked closely at the pipe. I don't understand, I replied. They invite the little oysters for a walk and then eat them. He tapped on the pipe. It made a small hollow sound. He moved his hand up the pipe and tapped again. Same sound. That's the point of the poem? Something about that horrified me. I don't know, but it's what happens. Another tap, another hollow sound. Oh, I say, it's what happens. Chapter 23. Brent. I caught the door just before it slammed shut, my hand barricading it from closing fully. The sting ran up my arm, and I pressed my lips together firmly. I was not going to cry out. I knew I was close to blowing this whole story wide open. This would be my way into the masquerade. This would be my way of earning the byline. Oh boy, did my hand hurt. I pulled my left hand joining my right as the door slowly and heavily slid open bit by bit. Voices floated up to me, Bill and Constance. I couldn't hear yet what they were saying. I pulled at the door, my whole body straining at the effort. This thing had been made of solid metal. Back in the days of Prohibition, there was likely more than just the Anti-Saloon League, and the police they wanted to keep out. This thing was bulletproof, and gang warfare was a common and bloody business. There was a click and a heavy sound, like a decision had just been made. I slowly relaxed my muscles, still holding onto the side of the door. Then I quickly jumped through the open space in the door into the room on the other side. I felt like a contortionist still holding the door. I was not about to be crushed to death by some decades-old piece of broken hardware. I let it go, the door stayed in place. I sighed and looked up at my right hand. There was a deep gash running down the middle of my palm where I had grabbed at the serrated edges. I flexed my hand slightly. The sting was impressive. It radiated through my entire body. I thought about characters I'd read in books making blood oaths and slicing their palms to do so, and found it absurd. Of all the places you cut yourself willingly, the palm. Really? The voices were growing quieter, and I realized I was losing track of Bill and Constance. I looked around the small gray cement room. It was completely empty, like a jail cell. But there was a gap in the wall, the width of a large man, with rough-hewn edges, as if the thing had been made quickly once upon a time. I ran through and made my way down the narrow wooden staircase in the dark, tripping over my feet. I stumbled towards the bottom of the staircase, my heels missing its step, and I managed to arrive at the floor upright but shaken. That feeling of missing a step feels like you're about to step off the edge of a cliff, even if the next step is just a few inches away. My heart was pounding in my chest. "You're Brant, right?" said Constance, and I looked up. She and Bill were standing in the distance beside a giant machine. It took up the entire other side of the room and almost touched the ceiling. It was square with some curved pipes leading out and then back in again. And then there was an opening to one side. The inside looked painted black. The whole thing looked relatively new. The metal gleamed, there was no sign of rust, but the dark black stains followed the path of its seams. I couldn't tell from where I stood if it was some kind of mold, possibly. "Brant, old chum," Bill said, shocked, but not unhappy to see me. Almost relieved, in fact. I smiled tightly. I knew if I wanted the inside story, I needed to keep up the act. But to be called an old chum just felt, well, condescending. "Hey, Bill, sorry about the intrusion, pal." I laughed a bit. It wasn't like I had stumbled into his office or anything. Here we were in an underbelly of Atlantic City, somewhere we had no right to be. I was hoping that the fact would prevent Bill from any bigger questions, like, say, why I was here in the first place. "Not an intrusion at all. In fact, I'm glad you're here. I was showing Constance the machine. You probably get a kick out of it, too." Something sounded off about Bill's voice. I just couldn't put my finger on it. The machine. I joined them and quickly looked more closely at the thing. It was huge, and I was standing right next to it. "What does it do?" I asked. "Well, that's the question, isn't it?" replied Constance. "Something super secret, evidently." "I'm not even supposed to know it's here," replied Bill. "How'd you find it?" I slowly started to walk around the machine, examining it closely from every angle. I arrived at the large opening on one side and peered inside. The black void stared back. "I've been working with the jet contractors." I didn't knew this, of course. I'd been spying on him for weeks, but I turned to look at Bill and raised my eyebrows like it was a pleasant surprise. Then I looked back inside the machine, this time reaching up and touching the blackness. A sticky black residue covered my fingertips. Then there was a sudden bang. I jumped. My heart was racing fast from the shock, but instantly I felt ashamed for being such a coward. I turned to smile and see others, even as I dried my sweaty palms on my trousers. "What was that?" asked Bill. I jumped. My heart was racing fast from the shock, but instantly I felt ashamed for being such a... I just reread the same thing. Ay. It sounded like it came from over there. Constance was pointing towards a large white rusted metal box, almost the height of the room. Standing beside one of the sinks, a thick chain was wrapped around its middle like a belt. "It looks like an old icebox," said Bill, approaching it. I stayed where I was and watched the two of them examine the box for a moment. I turned back to the machine, to the black void. I stared at it hard. Had it been a coincidence that the large, jarring sound had happened just when I touched the inside? I swallowed hard, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was an overwhelming excitement. I was so close to my story, to the truth. I felt elevated. "It's got a lock," said Constance. "Looks new," added Bill. Just as I reached up inside the machine again, I felt this draw, a need to touch the blackness once more, just to see, just to try. My finger grazed the inside. Bang! Constance screamed. I whipped around. "Are you okay?" I asked, but I wasn't worried. I was excited. There was some kind of correlation. There had to be. "There's something in there," she said, not turning to look at me. "There's something someone is trying to keep in there." She glanced over at Bill, who had as white as a sheet. "Then we need to know what it is, obviously." I thought to myself. I marched over to the icebox. "Okay, then let's see." I examined the chain and the lock. No rust, definitely new. This was it. This was the story right here. "I don't think we should open it," said Constance. "We probably shouldn't," I replied with a grin. "That's why we're going to." I turned to look at Bill, to get him on my side. "Can you pick a lock, Mr. Fix-It?" I knew he'd do it. I could see the indecision plain on his face, but I knew ultimately he'd do it. He was just like me, curious about the world. Yes, I can. He approached the box tentatively. Wait, said Constance. I inwardly rolled my eyes. She marched over to the wall, picked up a bottle from the ground. She looked for a moment, and then smashed it against the wall. Are you crazy? I asked, staring at her. She returned holding the broken bottle in her hand, the sharp edges sticking up like a demented torch. You two might want to encounter whatever it is unarmed, but I'm no fool, she replied and held the bottle in front of her, staring hard at the icebox. Okay, so maybe she wasn't scared after all. Wasn't so scared. There was a sound of metal on metal as the chain suddenly slipped down the icebox. It's done, said Bill, holding the lock and looking a little lost. I grabbed the fallen chains and wrapped it around the end of my hand. Constance had the good idea that there with the whole weapon thing. So are we certain that we should open this door? Asked Constance. I am, I replied. I've never felt more sure of anything in my life. I'm going to try to jump whatever it is. So you should stand back to the side, I told her. She did, standing by Bill, his hand on the edge of the door. On three. You ready? That's a complicated question, replied Bill. I didn't have time for his convoluted way of thinking. 1, 2, 3. Chapter 24. Bill. I flung open the door as Brant stood in front, the chain in both his hands. Ready to leap. I, for my part, was ready to grab Constance and run. I felt certain for whatever this monster was that Thomas was going on about, metaphor or not, human or not. This was it, right here in front of us. My hands were shaking. There was a silhouette that left both welcome and not in that moment. Yeah, felt welcome and not in that moment. There should have been a monster charging at us for all that noise coming from inside the icebox. But instead, it was quiet. It's empty, said Constance, gripping her bottle tightly. It can't be, said Brant. Okay, let me go back. I just had a really big brain fart. It's empty, said Constance, gripping her bottle tightly. It can't be, said Brant. He was standing right in front of the icebox, right there, staring into it. How could he doubt what his own eyes were telling him? Then again, my own mind played tricks on me all the time. I joined him at his side and looked into the box. It was indeed empty. Not even a black void like inside the machine. Just the back of an icebox, rusted like it's outside. The world around us seemed to get darker, murkier, like we were being drawn into the thing. I shook my head, trying to make the world brighten. It was my mind playing tricks on me again. I hate it. I had so little control over it. Did a light just go out? Asked Constance, her voice turning into a whisper. My heart leapt into my throat. It wasn't just me then. A figment of my imagination? It was real. I looked then. The light still buzzing overhead, but she was right. It really seemed darker in the room. Why? What was happening? I felt the urge to run, but I calmed myself down. There had to be a logical explanation. There was no room for panic. Not yet. The shadows, she whispered. She pointed to the wall. Well, that's strange, said Brant, finally speaking up, sounding as confident as ever. What do you think makes a thing like that happen? Black shadows seemed to drip down from the walls while others oozed from the floor to meet them. We seemed to be at some kind of grotesque center, which all the shadows were aiming to meet. How could Brant be this calm? Constance stepped forward towards the shadow and bent down to look closer. This was wrong. This was so very wrong. We should leave, I said, dread crawling all over my skin. Don't you want to know what's happening? Asked Brant. No, I did not. I wanted to leave. We all needed to leave. There's nothing there, said Constance, returning to our little group, speaking quietly but urgently. Her eyes were wide with concern. It's nothing tangible. It's just a shadow. A shadow of what? I asked, watching as it steeped closer, noticing as it did the rooms growing darker and darker. I don't know, she replied, her voice quivering as her eyes looked about the room. We stood there, frozen to the spot, not by any outside force, but by the weight of our own fears and confusion. At least I did. The room got darker and darker and darker. It seeped around us, and at any moment it would seep into us, I felt drawn to it even as I was repelled by it. We needed to move. We needed to move now. We stayed still. You know what? Said Brett, suddenly a lot closer to me than he was a moment ago. His voice finally tinged with concern. You're right. We need to leave. That's when the lights went out. There was no fuse box to find this time. No reasonable solution to the darkness. No wires to connect. It was a kind of darkness you'd only see when you closed your eyes. A piercing scream. Constance. Then I was whipped onto the floor. My body slammed onto the cold stone hard. But the searing pain I felt was something else. Something had grabbed my foot and was dragging me. Something sharp was digging in my ankle. I wanted to scream from the pain, but my fight or flight response took hold and adrenaline filled my body. I turned around on my back and kicked with my free foot. I kicked straight down at whatever it was. My foot connected with something solid. That's when something there, something real, something that wasn't just in my head. I yelled loudly as I kicked again with all my strength. There was an otherworldly, piercing scream that sounded like a roar. I kicked at it again and again, heart beating furiously. The sharpness scraped down my foot, causing me to cry out in pain. But I was free, scrambling up, being pulled by the neck of my shirt by someone above me. I was on my feet, my ankle stinging bad, and Brant said, panting, Are you okay? Let's get out of here, boys, now, Constance yelled. I whipped my head around and found her. She was over by the exit, dirt on her face, but I could tell that she was serious. There was a tear at her dress on the shoulder. The blackness around her was retreating. The shadows were slipping deeper and deeper into the room, where Brant and I stood, leaving the light on the fringes. Then there was a sudden crash, and I turned around. It was hard to see into the depths of the dark, but there was a little light from our escape route. I saw a huge, hulking shadow of something that looked like it was attacking the machine. It ran into it like a charging bull, but the machine was solid and stayed put. A monster, not a metaphor, a real monster. I could taste bile in my throat. My head burned from the fear. Bill, now! I felt Brant pulling on my shoulder, but I was drawn to the show in front of me. What was this monster? What looked so tall and weary, but looked like a shadow? Its head was humongous. It thrashed at the machine with its claws that glinted in the light. Suddenly, the machine came to life, lighting up the surrounding area with a sickly yellow glow. Large teeth reflected in the illumination, like a dream coming to life, a nightmare coming to life. The machine sputtered and cranked to life like a beast of another kind. Then it began vomiting all over the ground, right where we had been standing. Out of the giant open pipe came a thick black liquid. It poured out, quickly flowing into all corners of the room. The demon roared again. Bill! This time it was Constance, and hearing her voice was so loud and so angry, I was jolted back to reality. I turned and ran toward her, with Bill close behind. Not Bill, Brant, close behind. We ran for the exit and up the stairs, the sound of the roar still echoing in my ears. A mixing with sound of my blood rushing in my head and my heart racing. It was a cacophony of noise. The pain in my foot snaked its way up my leg like a lightning strike. I heard another roar from behind us, and it made me take the stairs two at a time, sweat now dripping down my forehead. I looked down and saw the shadows chasing us, climbing up the walls like vines. The black goo was floating at the bottom of the stairs, slowly rising. If we weren't eaten alive by this beast, then we might very well drown. The secret door was closed at the top of the stairs, but I knew how to open it. There was a small button hidden in the shadow of the corner. I had seen Mr. Connor push it on our way out. I reached up and with my shaking hand pushed it. I heard the gears grinding. It sounded off. Something was wrong. This isn't right, I said, more to myself than anything. I fiercely shoved aside my rising panic to focus on solving the problems. I wiped the sweat from my brow. I had to wrench it open to follow you, said Brant, panting as I looked at my side. That might have done something. I looked at him, but could only see him faintly in the shadowy dark. There was no time to point fingers, but I really wanted to. Why would he do this to us? What was he thinking? I turned back to the button and felt around. There had to be a panel of some sort. It's rising, said Constance, a desperate edge to her voice. I know, I replied, trying to stay calm, but trembling all the same. I got on my knees and traced my hand over the wall all the way to the floor, trying to feel for something, anything at all. There had to be something. Something. My hand caught on the divot and I pushed. The panel moved under my hand and quickly I removed it. My hands adjusted into the dark, but the dark was leaching more and more light from the air. I couldn't see. I just went for it and reached my hand into the small hole in the dark. I felt around and came to the lever. My heart stopped and I remembered earlier a similar level, a spray of black wet. I could do this. I had to do this. I pulled down hard, more grinding sounds, then a clang. More grinding sounds and then a clang. It's opening, said Constance. I've got it, added Brant. I stood up to see the door open just enough to fit a single body through. Brant strained to keep it open that wide in the first place. Constance, go, he ordered, and then she looked at both of us before slipping through. I can help, she said from the other side, her gloved hands appealing around the edge of the door, pulling it from her side. Bill, come on, said Brant, his voice now straining with the effort. Just stared at him, and then at the door. I heard the gears grinding. I could even smell the friction of metal on metal. The thought of the door slamming shut, slamming into a body, crushing it. Bill! I found myself through the door just like many other moments I've lost in my mind. I was just there. Bill! But this time it was Constance. She was attempting to brace the door open with Brant. I immediately joined her, grabbing hard while the door pushed back with all its might against us. We weren't strong enough for this. It was only thanks to the grace of some gears that the door was open this much at all. Brant, you have to jump through, said Constance, her voice strained. You'll have to do it now, I added. The smell of burning filled the air. Brant took a deep breath and nodded. I felt the door pushing into my hands hard now. I heard another clang, and suddenly there was a sickening weight against my palms. Constance cried out, but didn't let go. He had to do it now. Brant jumped. There was a large clank, and I instinctively grabbed Constance and pulled her away as the door mechanism took control. We fell onto the ground, and I stayed there for a moment, panting hard, feeling the sting in my palms and in my ankle. Brant! I sat up and turned to see Constance on the ground, pulling at Brant by the door. I stood and scrambled over, and then stopped at the scene before me. Brant's torso stuck through the door, but his bottom half trapped on the other side. The door was crushing him. If we didn't do something, if we didn't help him. Constance, stop, he said, wheezing. The landing was brightly lit. Being able to see so clearly almost felt like too much. But it made finding the opposite panel so much easier on this side, and I could even see what was behind it. I found the same lever, but it was loose to the touch. Moving it did nothing. I looked past it, further into the darkness of the wall. I saw a large brass button with stop-start on it. I hit it with all my might. The grinding stopped. The smell of metal on metal lingered in the air. I felt my body go limp with relief. Brant, stay with us, cried Constance. Brant, stay with us. Please. And everyone, that is the chapter 25. So, just so that, any questions you guys might have, some words that you guys heard me read, or just chapters, ask me about it, and I will go over it in the next video. Thank you for watching, and I hope you guys all have a great time. Goodbye.